Hello everybody, I am Urvi studying in class 8th A in Guru Nanak Public School, Bidar. Today in this video, I will try and explain friction and the different types of friction through various activities. Friction is found everywhere in the world. We can feel the effects of friction when we are riding a bicycle, when we are walking, or even when we are sitting. When we are riding a bicycle and we suddenly stop pedaling, the bicycle comes to a halt. This shows that everywhere in the world, any object which is moving over the surface of another object slows down when there is no external force acting on it. The force which is responsible for slowing down these objects is known as friction. Friction can be defined as the force that opposes motion between two objects which are in contact with each other. Friction is found in all mediums, that is, solids, liquids, and gases. Friction occurs when two objects are in contact with each other and one object is moving over the other object. Now let us see what does friction depend upon. Friction depends on the roughness or smoothness of the two surfaces which are in contact with each other, or it depends on the force which is pressing the two objects together. This means that the friction will be greater if the surface is rough, and if the force pressing the two objects together is great, then the force of friction between them will also be greater. Now let us see what increases friction. Friction is increased when the surface is rough or if the object is heavy. This means that if we have to move an object, the force exerted on it should be greater if the surface is rough or if the object is very heavy. Static friction occurs when the two objects which are in contact with each other are at rest, which means they are not in motion. Now, for an example is a book resting on a desk. This displays static friction. The force of static friction keeps a stationary object at rest. If we want to move an object, then the force exerted on the object should be greater than the static friction. Now, I will try to explain this better with an activity. In the first activity, I will try and show how static friction works. For this activity, we will be needing a book. This is a very heavy book and I am placing it on the table. As you can see, the book is at rest. Now, when I apply force on the book does not move. This shows that the static friction is working. Static friction does not allow an object to move when force is applied on it. If the force applied on the object is less than or equal to the static friction, then the object will not move. If we want the object to move, the force applied should be more than the static friction. This is how static friction works. Sliding friction is the resistance that is created between any two objects when they are sliding against each other. For example, sliding of the block across the floor displays sliding friction. The object always moves against this in the opposite direction of the sliding friction. Also, the sliding friction is always less than the static friction. Now, I will try to explain this better with an activity. In this activity, I will try and show how sliding friction works. For this activity, we are going to use the same book we used last time. Now, I will place the book on the table. As we saw in the previous activity, if we want to move an object, the force exerted on the object should be greater than the static friction. So, if I want this book to move, the force exerted on it should be greater than the static friction. As you can see, the book is sliding over the smooth surface. When the book is sliding over the surface, a new frictional force begins to act on the book. This force is known as sliding friction. Sliding friction is the force which opposes the movement of two objects which are in contact with each other and slide over each other. Sliding friction depends on the roughness or smoothness of a surface. Now this book is sliding smoothly over this surface. Now I'll place a cloth on this surface. Now as you can see, I have placed a cloth on the table. Now the surface has become slightly rough. I will take the same book and try and slide it over the surface. As you can see, it requires greater force on a rougher surface. This shows that sliding friction is less on a smoother surface and greater on a rougher surface. This is how sliding friction works. Rolling friction exists when one object rolls over another object. So, rolling friction can be defined as the friction that occurs between two surfaces in motion, in which one of the surfaces is a wheel, a ball, or a roller. For example, riding a bike. The rolling friction is found in between the tires and the ground. Also, rolling friction is always less than sliding friction and static friction. Now, I will try to explain this better with an activity. In this activity, I will try and show how rolling friction works. For this activity, we will be needing a few pencils and the same book. Now, I will place the pencils on the table. And I will place the book on top of the pencils. Now, I will try and move the book. As you can see, the book is moving quite easily. I have to apply very little force. When the book is rolling on top of the table, a new force begins to work. This force is known as rolling friction. Rolling friction is the force which opposes movement when two surfaces are in contact with each other and are rolling over each other. This is how rolling friction works. Friction, sliding friction, and rolling friction can be observed in solid mediums. Static friction is the greatest and rolling friction is the lowest. Static friction is greater than sliding friction and sliding friction is greater than rolling friction. So when we are moving an object, we need to apply the highest amount of force in static friction, slightly less force in sliding friction, and the least amount of force in rolling friction. All gases and liquids are fluids. The force that is exerted on when an object moves through a liquid or a gas is known as fluid friction. This is also known as drag. An airplane, a ship, and a swimmer all experience fluid friction. Fluid friction depends on the shape of the object, the size of the object, and the nature of the fluid. This is why all aeroplanes and ships have a streamlined shape. Now, I will try to explain this better with an activity. In this activity, we will try and see how fluid friction works. For this activity, I have taken two glasses. One of them is filled with water and the other is filled with sugar syrup. I have also taken two stones which are similar to each other. Now, please observe as I drop these two stones into the glasses simultaneously. As you can see, the stone in the glass of water sank to the bottom immediately. But in the sugar syrup, it took a little while longer. This is because the fluid friction in the glass of water is less than the fluid friction in the glass of sugar syrup. As we can see from this activity, fluid friction depends on the nature of the fluid. The friction on the stone in the glass of sugar syrup was greater because sugar syrup is more dense than water. This is how fluid friction works. As we already saw, static friction, sliding friction, and rolling friction can be observed in the solid mediums, whereas fluid friction can be observed in the liquid and gaseous mediums. When static friction is in work, no movement takes place. When sliding friction is in work, the object slides over the surface. When rolling friction is in work, the object rolls over the surface. In sliding friction is affected by the roughness or smoothness of an object of a surface or the weight of the object. Now, when we want to move an object, the force exerted is highest in static friction, it is a little less in sliding friction, and it is the least in rolling friction. Fluid friction is determined by the shape of the object, the speed of the object, and the nature of the fluid. In today's video, we discussed about what is friction and the different types of friction. I hope you liked this video. Thank you.